Number 10. The Hadza, the last echo of the hunter-gatherer world. In northern Tanzania, near Lake Eyasi, the Hadza preserve one of the clearest living echoes of humanity's oldest way of life. They are not prehistoric people frozen in time, and they are not a museum exhibit. They are modern human beings with their own choices, pressures, humor, families, and future. But they also carry something rare, a lifeway still closely tied to hunting, gathering, seasonal movement, shared food, and direct knowledge of the land. In a world ruled by farms, roads, property, and schedules, the Hadza remain one of the last reminders that for most of human history, survival depended on reading the landscape rather than controlling it. And before agriculture, before kingdoms, before writing, most people lived by hunting animals, gathering plants, digging roots, collecting berries, finding honey, shaping tools, and moving with the seasons. The Hadza still preserve important parts of that world. Men hunt with bows and arrows. Women gather berries, baobab fruit, and tubers that remain central to daily life. Honey is prized. Camps are often mobile. Food is widely shared instead of stored in vast private quantities. Survival depends less on distant systems than on what the land offers and what the community knows. That does not make Hadza life simple. It makes it deeply skilled. Most modern people dropped into the same landscape would fail within days. That is what makes the Hadza such a powerful prehistoric echo. They preserve not just an old economy, but an old relationship between people and environment. But they know how to read animal movement, where roots can be dug, which plants nourish when fruit is ready, how birds can help lead humans to honey, and how dry country changes through the year. This kind of knowledge is not written in books. It lives in memory, practice, and observation. It is the kind of intelligence that shaped Homo sapiens long before cities taught us to value different kinds of expertise. A hunting camp may look fragile to outsiders, but it rests on a dense web of knowledge about land, weather, movement, and cooperation. Their social life is just as revealing. Hadza communities have often been described as relatively egalitarian compared with many farming and state societies. Food sharing helps reduce risk. Personal autonomy matters. People can shift between camps. No great palace, priesthood, or bureaucracy stands over everyday life. And in that sense, the Hadza preserve clues not only about how humans once found food, but how they may have organized society before agriculture transformed power. The pre-farming world was not automatically peaceful or easy, but it also was not yet shaped by the rigid hierarchies that later civilizations made seem normal. Their language deepens the mystery. Hadza speech stands apart from the dominant languages around it and includes clicks that immediately remind us how old and diverse Africa's human worlds still are. A language is more than vocabulary. It carries memory, categories, humor, and ways of noticing reality. When a distinctive language survives alongside a distinctive subsistence pattern, it preserves more than culture. It preserves a different configuration of being human, a different answer to how life can be lived. But the Hadza live under intense pressure. Farming expansion, pastoral land use, conservation policy, tourism, religion, schooling, and state control all narrow the space in which a hunting and gathering life can continue. When land is fenced, privatized, or heavily regulated, old movement patterns break. When children spend less time learning camp knowledge, ancient skills weaken. When markets replace what the landscape once provided, the older rhythm changes. The danger is not that the Hadza are outdated. The danger is that a single global model keeps spreading until every older human pattern is treated as something temporary, inconvenient, or expendable. What makes this so disturbing is that when a hunter-gatherer world disappears, it does not vanish like a ruined temple. There is no monument left for archaeology to recover. What disappears is harder to reconstruct. Knowledge of plants, habits of movement, food-sharing ethics, oral memory, and the feeling of a life tied directly to land rather than distant institutions. That is why the Hadza belong at number 10 among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They remind us that the age before agriculture did not vanish completely into stone tools and ancient bones. Part of it is still alive in Tanzania, still walking, hunting, gathering, sharing, and remembering. And if that echo falls silent, humanity will lose not only a culture, but one of its last living windows into how our species spent most of its time on Earth. Number 9, the San, the deepest living branch of humanity. In southern Africa, across the Kalahari and nearby regions, the San preserve one of the deepest living connections to the earliest story of Homo sapiens. They are not a single simple group, and they are not a frozen picture of the Stone Age. They are many communities, languages, histories, and modern lives shaped by survival, loss, resistance, and change. But their genetic lineages, click languages, rock art traditions, and hunter-gatherer knowledge make them one of the strongest living echoes of the human past. If the Hadza show us a surviving rhythm of hunting and gathering, the San show us something older, a branch of humanity reaching toward the deepest roots of our species. Genetic studies often place San lineages among the earliest diverging branches of modern humans. But that does not mean they are unchanged, and it does not make them ancestors of everyone else in a simple way. It means their history preserves a portion of human diversity that split very early from other populations. In the deep past, Africa held far more human variation than most people imagine. Many branches vanished, merged, or were transformed by migration. The San are one of the rare reminders that humanity began not as one narrow type, but as a wide family spread across ancient African landscapes. Their languages make that depth audible. Many San languages use click consonants with extraordinary richness and precision, creating sound systems unlike the dominant language families around them today. These clicks are not exotic decorations. They are part of full, living languages with grammar, humor, memory, and social meaning. Every language carries a way of noticing the world. When a language declines, a library of perception disappears with it. Their knowledge of land is equally important. For generations, San communities lived by tracking animals, gathering plants, finding water, reading weather, using poisons, making tools, telling stories, and moving through environments outsiders often saw as empty. But the Kalahari is not empty to those who know how to read it. Tracks in sand can reveal species, direction, speed, and time. A plant can mean food, medicine, poison, or hidden water. This is an intelligence of attention, patience, and memory, built through close relationship with place. The San also left one of the world's great rock art traditions. Across southern Africa, painted and engraved images show animals, human figures, trance scenes, mixed human-animal forms, and spiritual experiences that may preserve fragments of older belief systems. And these images are not simple decoration. They suggest a world where hunting, healing, trance, animals, and the spirit realm were deeply connected. The art does not let us fully enter San cosmology, but it reveals that pre-agricultural life was not only about food. It was also about vision, ritual, story, and unseen forces that gave the world meaning. Yet the San have faced centuries of pressure. Colonial expansion, farming, cattle ranching, state borders, forced relocation, conservation policies, tourism, and discrimination have taken land and weakened old lifeways. In many areas, hunting has been restricted or criminalized. Languages are losing speakers. Children are drawn into schooling and economies that often treat ancestral knowledge as useless. The tragedy is not that the San are entering the modern world, but the tragedy is that the modern world often enters by destroying the land and autonomy needed for older knowledge to survive. What makes this loss so disturbing is that the San are not merely one culture among many. They are a living reminder of how much of humanity's original diversity has already disappeared. The populations that left Africa carried only part of the continent's genetic and cultural richness. Later migrations, states, and empires reduced that diversity even further. The San show that the human past was not a single path toward farming and cities. It was a vast field of different ways of being human, most erased before they could speak for themselves in writing. That is why the San belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They remind us that the oldest human stories are not all locked in fossils or caves. Some are still carried in language, bloodlines, tracking knowledge, rock art, healing traditions, and memory. The San are not relics. They are people living in the present. But through them, we glimpse a depth of human history that modern civilization has almost forgotten. A world where survival depended on listening to land, reading animals, sharing knowledge, and holding stories older than agriculture. If those languages fall silent and those lands are lost, humanity will lose one of its deepest mirrors. Number 8. The Andaman Islanders, the first wave survivors of the Indian Ocean. In the Bay of Bengal, between India and Myanmar, the Andaman Islands hold some of the most fragile living echoes of the first great human migrations. The peoples of these islands are not one single group. They include communities with different histories, languages, and relationships to the outside world, such as the Jarawa, Onge, Great Andamanese, and Sentinelese. Some have had devastating contact with outsiders. Some continue to limit contact. All of them remind us that the movement of Homo sapiens out of Africa was not a single clean journey across an empty map. It was a series of coastal crossings, island refuges, lost branches, and human worlds that survived in places later history nearly forgot. What makes the Andaman Islanders so important is the depth of their ancestry. But their lineages are often discussed in connection with very early movements of modern humans along the Indian Ocean rim. Tens of thousands of years ago, small groups moved through coastlines, forests, islands, and shorelines that looked nothing like the modern map. Sea levels were lower, land connections were different. Coastal routes that may have supported ancient travelers are now drowned. The Andamans may preserve a living trace of that older world, a world of small seafaring or coastal populations, isolated for immense stretches of time, carrying memories in bodies and languages rather than monuments. Their survival challenges the way civilization usually tells history. The people who built cities left walls. The people who wrote records left archives. But many of the first humans to move across the planet left almost nothing that could survive tropical time. Wood rotted. The shells broke. Camps vanished. Shorelines drowned. In such places, the human past is almost impossible to recover through ordinary archaeology. The Andaman Islanders matter because they show that not every prehistoric world disappeared into the ground. Some continued through living communities, even as the material traces around them vanished. The languages of the Andaman Islands make the story even more haunting. Several Andamanese languages have disappeared or are critically endangered. When a language dies, it does not merely lose words for trees, fish, winds, and kinship. It loses a way of classifying reality. Island languages often encode relationships with coasts, reefs, forests, animals, and seasons that outsiders cannot easily see. A single place name can carry memory of movement, danger, food, spirits, or ancestry. When those languages vanish, a map of the world disappears with them, even if the island remains physically in place. The destruction caused by outside contact has been severe. Colonial rule, disease, forced settlement, violence, alcohol, dependency, land loss, and administrative control reduced populations that had survived for tens of thousands of years. The Great Andamanese, once made up of multiple tribes and languages, were devastated after contact. Some groups were relocated, some languages lost their last fluent speakers. What took deep time to preserve was broken in only a few generations. That is the terrifying pattern repeated across the world. A community can survive ice ages, sea level change, storms, hunger, and isolation, only to be nearly erased by modern expansion. The Andaman Islanders also reveal a difficult truth about contact. Modern societies often assume that integration is always progress. Roads, markets, schools, tourism, and government programs are treated as gifts. But for isolated or semi-isolated peoples, contact can be lethal. Disease can move faster than understanding. Outsiders can take land while claiming to help. Curiosity can become invasion. Even well-meaning attention can destroy the privacy and autonomy that allowed a community to survive. In the Andamans, the right to remain separate is not a romantic idea. It can be a condition of survival. That is why the Andaman Islanders belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They are not fossils, and they are not untouched copies of the past, and they are living peoples facing modern pressure while carrying traces of ancient migrations, island adaptation, endangered languages, and coastal knowledge from a human story far older than writing. Through them, we glimpse a time when the Indian Ocean was not a barrier, but a corridor, when small communities moved along drowned shorelines and built lives without leaving stone cities behind. If these languages, lands, and communities are lost, humanity will not only lose cultures of the present, it will lose one of its last living connections to the first long journey that carried our species across the edge of the world. Number 7. The Sentinelese, the island that still refuses the modern world. In the Bay of Bengal, on a small forested island surrounded by coral reefs, there is a community that has made one message clear for generations. The outside world is not welcome. The Sentinelese of North Sentinel Island are often described as one of the most isolated peoples on Earth, but isolation is not the full story. They are not lost, helpless, or waiting to be discovered. They are defending a boundary. Boats that come too close are met with arrows. Strangers who step onto the beach are treated as threats. North Sentinel remains one of the few places where modern civilization has been forced to stop at the shoreline. What makes the Sentinelese such a powerful living echo of prehistory is not that they are unchanged. No living people are unchanged. It is that they preserve a rare form of autonomy, a small island society choosing separation from global systems that have swallowed almost everything else. Their tools, language, rituals, stories, and social life remain largely unknown because they have not given outsiders permission to know them. Modern people are used to treating knowledge as a right. The Sentinelese remind us that some human worlds survive by refusing to become information. Their ancestry is often discussed alongside the deep history of the Andaman Islands, a region connected to some of the oldest movements of modern humans through the Indian Ocean world. Tens of thousands of years ago, small human groups moved through coastlines and islands that no longer look the same. Sea levels changed, shorelines drowned, populations migrated, mixed, vanished, or were absorbed. And on North Sentinel, a small community endured in isolation, developing its own way of life in dense forest, reef, beach, and sea. They have no need to match anyone's idea of progress. Their world works by rules outsiders barely understand. That is why contact is so dangerous. Isolated peoples can be vulnerable to diseases carried by outsiders. A single encounter can bring infections against which a small population may have little defense. History is full of examples where contact did not bring enlightenment, but collapse, disease, land theft, forced settlement, dependency, violence, and cultural loss. The Sentinelese appear to know through memory or experience that outsiders are dangerous. Their refusal is not ignorance. It is a survival strategy written in arrows, beaches, reefs, and generations of warning. But the modern world struggles with that refusal because it contradicts the story modernity tells about itself. We like to believe that everyone should want roads, markets, schools, money, phones, maps, and contact. But the Sentinelese show another possibility, that a community may decide the price of joining the global world is too high. They may not describe it in our terms, and we should not pretend to know their inner reasoning. But their actions are clear enough. They have chosen distance. They have protected that distance with force. And for once, the outside world has had to admit that protection may be justified. The island itself becomes a kind of living archive, Not because it shows exactly how humans lived in the distant past, but because it preserves a truth most of prehistory shared. People belonged to small communities, knew their territory intimately, and often treated outsiders with caution. For most of human existence, there was no single human world. There were many worlds, separated by forests, rivers, mountains, deserts, and seas. North Sentinel reminds us of that older map of humanity, where every group had its own knowledge, boundaries, and ways of being human. But that boundary is fragile. Rising seas, reef damage, illegal fishing, tourism, missionary attempts, and accidental contact all threaten the island's future. A community can repel a boat with arrows, but it cannot shoot down a virus, stop the ocean from rising, or prevent distant governments from making decisions about the waters around it. But the Sentinelese have survived by resisting contact, but the modern age creates threats that do not always arrive as visible people on the beach. That is why the Sentinelese belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They are not a symbol for outsiders to romanticize, study, or invade. They are a living people who have made their refusal unmistakable. Through them, we are reminded that not every human world must be opened, translated, filmed, or absorbed. Some histories survive because they remain closed. Some cultures endure because they reject the hand reaching toward them. North Sentinel, silent behind its reefs, carries one uncomfortable truth. Progress is not always an invitation. Sometimes survival means saying no to the entire world. Number 6. The Ainu, the living echo of Jomon, Japan. In the cold north of Japan, especially on Hokkaido, the Ainu preserve one of the most haunting living echoes of a world far older than the Japanese state. They are not a vanished people, and they are not simply a remnant from the past. They are a living indigenous people with modern struggles, cultural revival, political recognition, and a history marked by pressure from the societies around them. But within Ainu identity are echoes of something ancient. The Jomon world, a long-lasting prehistoric culture that existed in the Japanese archipelago for thousands of years before rice agriculture, emperors, samurai, and written chronicles reshaped the islands. The Jomon were not a simple footnote before Japanese history, and they made some of the oldest pottery in the world, lived in forests and coastal settlements, gathered nuts, hunted animals, fished rivers and seas, created ritual objects, and sustained cultural traditions across an almost unimaginable span of time. Later, new populations and new ways of life entered the archipelago, especially with rice agriculture and metalworking from the Asian mainland. Across much of Japan, Jomon ancestry and culture were absorbed into the population that became the foundation of later Japanese society. But in the north, where climate and distance slowed that transformation, more of the older world endured. The Ainu became one of its strongest living echoes. What makes the Ainu so powerful is not that they preserve the Jomon world unchanged. No culture remains unchanged across thousands of years. Instead, they preserve traces, genetic continuity, northern lifeways, oral memory, ritual relationships with animals, distinctive art, and a language isolate that stands apart from Japanese. The Ainu language is especially haunting because it has no proven relatives. It carries a different structure of thought, place, and memory from the dominant languages around it. When a language like that fades, the loss is not only linguistic, it is the disappearance of a separate map of reality, shaped by rivers, bears, salmon, forests, snow, spirits, kinship, and generations of northern life. The Ainu relationship with animals reveals another ancient layer. In traditional belief, animals and natural forces could be understood as spiritual beings visiting the human world. Bears, in particular, held deep ritual significance. This famous bear ceremony, often misunderstood by outsiders, reflected a complex relationship between humans, animals, spirits, gratitude, fear, and exchange. To modern eyes, such rituals can seem strange or uncomfortable, but they belong to a world where survival depended on animals, and where the boundary between nature and spirit was not drawn the way modern societies draw it. It is an old human attempt to live ethically inside a dangerous living landscape. Ainu material culture also speaks with a northern voice. Carved patterns, woven clothing, ceremonial objects, fishing tools, hunting knowledge, and oral epics known as yukar all carry a sense of place. These traditions formed in a world of cold forests, rivers filled with salmon, sea mammals, bears, and seasonal change. They remind us that prehistoric survival was not only about endurance, it was about beauty, ceremony, identity, and story. A people can live close to hardship and still create a rich symbolic world. But the survival of the Ainu has been deeply threatened. As the Japanese state expanded northward, Ainu land was taken. Traditional hunting and fishing were restricted, names were changed, assimilation policies were imposed, and the Ainu language was pushed towards silence. For generations, many Ainu people faced discrimination and pressure to hide their identity. Cultural practices that had carried memory across centuries were interrupted. By the time formal recognition began to improve, much damage had already been done. The chain connecting the present to the older northern world had been weakened, though not broken. That is why the Ainu belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today, and they remind us that ancient cultures do not always vanish in one dramatic collapse. Sometimes they survive as fragments inside living communities, a song remembered by elders, a carved pattern, a word for a river, a ceremony revived, a body of ancestry, a story about bears, a language class taught to children after generations of suppression. Through the Ainu, we do not see the Jomon world exactly as it was. We see its echo changed by time, wounded by history, but still alive. And that echo matters because it tells us that the deep past of Japan did not disappear completely into pottery shards and archaeological sites. Part of it kept breathing in the north. Number 5. The Basques, Europe's last pre-Indo-European voice. In the mountains and coastal valleys where Spain and France meet, the Basques preserve one of Europe's most mysterious living echoes of a world that existed before the continent became what it is today. Their homeland, Euskal Herria, sits in a region crossed by empires, kingdoms, armies, traders, pilgrims, and modern states. Yet through all of that movement, one thing survived with astonishing force: Euskara, the Basque language. It does not belong to the Indo-European family that dominates almost all of Europe. It has no proven living relatives. It stands alone, like a voice from an older continent that should have disappeared thousands of years ago. That is what makes the Basques so powerful for the story of prehistoric survival. Most European languages today descend from later waves of migration and cultural transformation. Latin became Romance languages. Germanic languages spread north and west. Celtic languages survived in fragments. Slavic languages expanded across the east. But before those language families dominated the map, Europe held many older tongues spoken by older communities and cultures whose names were never written. Almost all of those languages vanished. Euskara survived. The survival of Basque does not mean the Basques are unchanged from prehistory, and it does not mean they are a pure fossil population. Like all peoples, they have mixed, adapted, changed, and lived through history. But their language preserves a rare kind of continuity, a linguistic island in a continent repeatedly overwritten by conquest and migration. When Rome expanded, Latin spread across Iberia and Gaul. When later kingdoms formed, new political identities rose around them. Yet Euskara remained in valleys, villages, songs, names, and everyday speech. It survived not by becoming an empire, but by refusing to disappear. A language like Euskara is more than a communication tool. It is a structure of memory. It carries place names that preserve relationships with rivers, mountains, forests, and settlements. It carries older categories of kinship, landscape, work, weather, and belonging. It holds songs, oral forms, proverbs, and identities that cannot be translated without losing something. When a language isolates survives, it is like finding a living chamber that still contains air from a vanished world. We cannot hear the full language of prehistoric Europe, but through Basque we hear one surviving echo of its older diversity. That echo also reveals what was lost. And if one non-Indo-European language survived in the Pyrenees, how many others once filled the continent? How many names did ancient Europeans have for rivers that now carry later names? How many myths, laws, burial songs, hunting stories, and sacred places disappeared when their languages died? The Basque language is often treated as a curiosity, but it is also a grave marker. It tells us that Europe before Rome, before the Celts, before the Germanic migrations, before the Indo-European spread, was not silent. It was full of voices. Only one of those voices still speaks clearly. The geography helped. Mountains can protect memory. Valleys can slow replacement. Communities with strong identity can preserve language even when larger powers surround them. But survival was never automatic. Euskara endured pressure from Latin, Spanish, French, schooling systems, political control, stigma, and modern homogenization. At times, speaking Basque could be discouraged or punished. In many families, transmission weakened. Some dialects declined. Like so many ancient echoes, the language survived not because history was gentle, but because people chose to keep it alive. Today, Basque has undergone revival efforts, education programs, media use, and renewed cultural pride. That makes it different from many other endangered echoes on this list. Its survival is not only an accident of geography, it is also a modern act of defense. People are teaching it, writing it, speaking it publicly, and making sure children inherit what earlier generations nearly lost. This matters because a living echo cannot remain alive by being admired from a distance. It must be used. It must become ordinary again. That is why the Basques belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They remind us that the deepest past does not always survive in bones, temples, or DNA. Sometimes it survives in grammar, in a word for mountain, in a name for a house, in a song carried through a family, in a language that should have vanished when the rest of Europe changed, but did not. The Basques are not people outside history. They are people who passed through history while carrying a voice older than the world around it. And as long as Euskara is spoken, Europe has not completely lost the sound of what came before. Number 4, Aboriginal Australians, the oldest continuous cultural memory. Across Australia, Aboriginal peoples preserve one of the oldest continuous cultural memories on Earth. This is not one single culture or one story. It is a vast world of many nations, languages, laws, and traditions, each rooted in specific country. Together, they carry something extraordinary, a living relationship with land that reaches back tens of thousands of years, deeper than pyramids, cities, farming states, or written empires. In most places, prehistory is silent because the people who made it are gone. In Australia, parts of that deep past still speak through story, song, ceremony, art, and place. What makes Aboriginal Australian tradition so powerful is that memory is tied to landscape. Hills, rivers, waterholes, stars, animals, rocks, and coastlines are not just scenery, and they can be part of lore, ancestry, root, and sacred knowledge. The dreaming is often misunderstood by outsiders as mythology alone, but it is far more than old stories. It can encode relationships between people and country, explain origins, preserve moral obligations, map movement, and connect the living to ancestral beings whose actions shaped the world. In this system, land is not a background for human life. Land is memory itself. Songlines are one of the clearest examples of that ancient intelligence. A songline can connect places across huge distances, carrying navigation, story, lore, and identity through rhythm and performance. To sing the land is also to know how to move through it. In a continent of deserts, coasts, wetlands, mountains, and seasonal extremes, such knowledge could mean survival. And a route might preserve where water can be found, where food appears, where danger lies, and how different groups are connected. Before paper maps, people held maps in song, body, and ceremony. That is not a lesser form of knowledge. It is a different technology of memory. Some Aboriginal oral traditions may preserve memories of environmental changes that happened thousands of years ago, including rising seas after the last ice age. Stories of drowned coastlines, lost islands, and lands once reachable by walking suggest that cultural memory can survive across spans of time that written history rarely imagines. If even some of these memories reach back to the end of the Ice Age, then Aboriginal traditions are not only cultural treasures, they are archives of climate, geography, and experience carried across generations without writing. This breaks the narrow timeline of civilization. But the modern world often treats writing as the beginning of reliable memory. But Aboriginal Australia shows that memory can be carried in other ways. Through repeated ceremony, strict transmission, place-based teaching, kinship responsibility, art and song. A society does not need stone palaces to hold deep knowledge. It does not need king lists to preserve law. It does not need writing to maintain history. For tens of thousands of years, people in Australia kept systems of knowledge alive through living practice. The tragedy is what happened when the colonial world arrived. Land was taken, languages were suppressed, children were removed, ceremonies were disrupted, sacred places were damaged or ignored. European settlers often failed to understand that destroying a landscape could also destroy a library, a legal system, and a historical record. When country is damaged, memory is damaged with it. When language transmission breaks, the meanings attached to places can become harder to carry forward. The loss is not only cultural, it is historical on a scale the world still struggles to recognize. Yet Aboriginal peoples are not only survivors of destruction. They are active keepers, teachers, artists, activists, elders, and communities, continuing to protect country and revive language, law, and ceremony where colonial violence tried to break them. Rock art, oral traditions, dance, song, and indigenous scholarship all show that the old memory has not vanished. It has adapted, resisted, and continued. The echo is wounded, but it is alive. That is why Aboriginal Australians belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They remind us that the oldest human histories are not always buried underground. Some are sung across country, some are painted on rock walls, some are held in place names, kinship systems, and ceremonies that connect the present to the deep past. Through Aboriginal Australia, we glimpse a human achievement older than civilization, as the word is usually used. The ability to keep memory alive without writing, across ice ages, rising seas, migrations, and conquest. If those languages, places, and songlines are lost, humanity will lose one of its greatest living archives. Not a fossil from prehistory, but prehistory still speaking. Number 3. The Papuan Highlanders, the Denisovan shadow in living blood. In the highlands of New Guinea, among mountains, forests, valleys, and isolated communities, the Papuan Highlanders carry one of the deepest living echoes of the prehistoric Pacific. New Guinea is one of the most linguistically and culturally diverse places on Earth, with hundreds of languages and many different societies shaped by geography as much as time. But beneath that diversity lies something extraordinary. Ancient ancestry rooted in some of the earliest human movements into Sahul, the Ice Age landmass that once joined New Guinea, Australia, and Tasmania. What makes Papuan ancestry so powerful is its depth. Their ancestors were among the first modern humans to move far beyond Africa and into the eastern edge of the ancient world. And to reach Sahul, people had to cross water, survive tropical forests, and adapt to landscapes unlike anything their ancestors had known before. This was not passive wandering. It was one of the great human expansions, a movement into a continent world filled with mountains, reefs, rivers, volcanoes, and ecological extremes. Those survivors became part of one of the oldest continuous human stories outside Africa. The highlands add another layer. New Guinea's interior is rugged, steep, wet, and divided by valleys that can isolate communities from one another for generations. That isolation helped create astonishing linguistic diversity. In many parts of the planet, empires and states flattened language diversity over time. In New Guinea, the mountains preserved it. Each valley could become a human world of its own. Each language could carry a different map of plants, pigs, gardens, ancestors, spirits, and land. But the most haunting part of the Papuan story lies deeper than culture. Many Papuan and Melanesian populations carry significant Denisovan ancestry, the genetic shadow of a vanished human relative. This does not make them Denisovans, and it should never reduce living peoples to ancient DNA. But it means their ancestors once met and interbred with a human group that modern science barely understands. The Denisovans left few bones, few faces, and almost no clear culture we can identify, yet fragments of their biology still live in Papuan blood. A lost humanity disappeared as a separate people, but part of it remained hidden inside the descendants of those who encountered them. This is why the Papuan Highlanders feel like a living echo of a much larger prehistoric world. And their ancestry does not tell a simple story of one group replacing another. It tells a story of contact, mixture, adaptation, and survival across island Southeast Asia and Sahel. Before the modern map, this region may have been crowded with different human lineages, modern, archaic, and some known only from DNA. The Papuan genetic record reminds us that Homo sapiens did not enter an empty world. It entered a world already inhabited by other humans. The cultural survival of Papuan highland communities is just as important. Many developed agriculture independently or very early, especially through root crops, gardens, and pigs. This makes them different from the hunter-gatherer echoes elsewhere on this list. Their prehistoric connection is also about ancient adaptation to highland environments, food systems, social networks, and landscapes managed over immense time. Time. They show that deep human continuity can mean building a distinct world of gardens, rituals, languages, and kinship, far from the famous centers of civilization. Yet these living echoes are under pressure. Mining, logging, roads, missionary influence, state power, conflict, language loss, and global markets have all altered highland life. Some communities gain new tools and opportunities, but they also face the erosion of older knowledge. When a small language stops being passed to children, a whole valley's memory can vanish. When forests are cleared or sacred places damaged, knowledge tied to land weakens. When outside economies reshape life, older systems of ceremony and identity can be pushed aside before the wider world understands their depth. That is why the Papuan Highlanders belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. And they carry ancient island ancestry, extreme linguistic diversity, highland adaptations, and genetic traces from encounters with lost human relatives. Through them we glimpse a prehistoric Pacific that was not empty, simple, or silent, but crowded with movement, mixture, and survival. They are not relics of the past, they are living peoples of the present. But their existence reminds us that parts of the deep human story did not end in fossils or caves. Some of it still breathes in mountain valleys, in languages shaped by isolation, and in DNA that remembers humans whose bones we may never find. Number 2. The Sami, the Arctic memory of Europe's far north. In the far north of Europe, across Sapmi, the homeland stretching through parts of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula, the Sami preserve a living echo of one of humanity's oldest relationships with the Arctic. They are not a vanished people, and they are not simply a symbol of snow, reindeer, and wilderness. They are modern indigenous peoples with communities, languages, livelihoods, struggles, and futures. But within Sami culture survives a deep memory of life at the edge of the habitable world, where cold, darkness, migration, animals, and landscape shaped human existence in ways most settled civilizations never fully understood. The Arctic is not empty to those who know how to read it. To outsiders, it can look like a white desert, a place of ice, wind, and silence. But for Sami communities, the northern landscape is filled with roots, grazing lands, rivers, mountains, weather signs, stories, sacred places, and seasonal knowledge. Reindeer are central to many Sami traditions, not as simple livestock, but as part of a relationship linking people, animals, land, mobility, food, clothing, tools, economy, and identity. To live with reindeer is to understand movement. It means knowing when to travel, where snow hardens, where animals feed, where danger forms, and how weather can decide survival. That is what makes the Sami such a powerful living echo of prehistoric northern worlds. After the Ice Age, humans moved into the far north and learned to survive in environments that demanded specialized knowledge. Survival there required more than strength. It required memory across seasons, cooperation across distance, respect for animal behavior, and the ability to move rather than force the land into a fixed pattern. In many farming civilizations, land becomes property that stays still while people claim it. In reindeer landscapes, life follows movement. The map is a cycle across snow, pasture, forest, and mountain. Sami languages deepen that connection. There are multiple Sami languages, and several are endangered. They contain detailed ways of speaking about snow, reindeer, landforms, weather, and movement. Such words are not decorative. They carry survival information. A small difference in snow texture can matter to reindeer hooves, sled travel, grazing, or danger. A language built in the Arctic notices what outsiders miss. When one of these languages weakens, the loss is not only poetic, it is a loss of environmental knowledge shaped across generations. Spiritual and cultural memory also ties the Sami to a much older northern world. Traditional beliefs included sacred landscapes, drums, joik singing, spirits, and relationships between humans, animals, ancestors, and places. Joik is especially powerful because it does not simply describe a person, animal, or landscape. It can evoke them, carry them, make presence through sound. In a world without written archives, such forms of memory matter deeply. They preserve identity through voice, rhythm, and repetition. They make the past audible. But the Sami have faced heavy pressure from the states around them. Borders cut across migration routes. Christianity suppressed older spiritual practices. Assimilation policies targeted language, clothing, naming, schooling, and identity. Land was taken or regulated for mining, forestry, hydropower, roads, tourism, and national development. Reindeer herding has often been squeezed by modern infrastructure and climate change. Snow patterns shift. Ice forms unpredictably. Grazing lands fragment. The Arctic memory survives, but the Arctic itself is changing. What makes this loss so disturbing is that the Sami preserve knowledge that modern civilization may need more than ever. They understand climate not as an abstract graph, but as lived change on the land. They notice when snow behaves differently, when migration routes fail, when animals respond to warming, when ice becomes dangerous. Their knowledge does not replace science, but it sees what distant measurement can miss. A culture shaped by listening to the far north carries warnings that a warming world should not ignore. But that is why the Sami belong among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They remind us that Europe's deep past did not only survive in caves, megaliths, or buried bones. Some of it survived in northern movement, reindeer knowledge, endangered languages, joik, clothing, craft, and relationships with landscapes that most of the world sees only as empty cold. They are living peoples defending land, language, and identity in the present. Through them, we glimpse an older human truth. Survival in the Arctic was never about conquering nature. It was about moving with it, listening to it, and remembering that the cold has its own language. Number 1. The Piraha, the present tense people of the Amazon. Deep in the Brazilian Amazon, along the Mighty River, the Piraha preserve one of the most unusual living challenges to how modern civilization understands the human mind. They are not a prehistoric tribe, and they are not a curiosity outside time. They are a living indigenous people with their own language, humor, choices, memories, and relationship to the forest. But their culture has become famous because it seems to organize experience in ways that disturb many assumptions about what language and thought are supposed to require. In a world obsessed with history, plans, numbers, records, and abstract systems, the Pirahã remind us that human reality can be built around something more immediate. Their language has often been described as deeply tied to direct experience. Many accounts emphasize that Pirahã communication focuses on what someone has seen, heard, or learned from a living witness. Distant origin myths, long genealogies, fixed creation stories, and remote historical narratives do not appear to function in the same way they do in many other cultures. Outsiders find this shocking, because civilization depends on the unseen past and imagined future. States run on records. Religions reach into creation time. Economies depend on debt, storage, and planning. The Pirahã show that a human community can organize life with far less emphasis on abstract time than the modern world considers normal. One of the most discussed features of Pirahã life is the reported absence of exact number words. Instead of counting in the way most societies do, Pirahã speakers use approximate quantity expressions. To a civilization built on mathematics, money, calendars, and measurement, this sounds almost impossible. But that reaction says more about us than about them. Numbers are powerful tools, but they are still tools. A community that does not build life around stored wealth, taxation, architecture, or bureaucracy may not need the same numerical habits that cities require. Their world is not less human because it does not mirror the systems that built empires. The Pirahã also challenge the idea that progress always means accumulation. Many societies store food, preserve long myths, expand territory, and treat growth as success. Pirahã life has often been described as more immediate, mobile, and resistant to outside transformation. Missionaries, traders, officials, and researchers have entered their world, but the Pirahã have not simply surrendered their own way of life to outside expectations. They take what is useful, reject what is not, and remain themselves. That refusal is not ignorance, it is cultural strength. What makes them a living echo of prehistory is not that they show us exactly how early humans thought. No living people can be treated as a direct copy of the Stone Age. The Pirahã have their own history, shaped by the Amazon, contact, resistance, and change. But they preserve a possibility that modern civilization has nearly forgotten, a form of life less dominated by accumulation, abstraction, and distant time. Before writing, before state religion, before archives, humans lived largely through direct experience, oral exchange, memory, and the demands of the present landscape. But this forest is not empty wilderness to them. It is a living world of rivers, animals, danger, food, sound, and movement. To survive, there requires attention. A wrong plant can harm. A river shift can matter. A sound in the forest can mean opportunity or threat. Knowledge does not have to be stored in books to be precise. It can live in practice, listening, repetition, and shared experience. Their world is not without intelligence. It is intelligence tuned differently. Yet their future is uncertain. Like many indigenous peoples of the Amazon, they face pressure from disease, illegal extraction, missionary activity, state policy, environmental destruction, and outside economies. A culture that has resisted absorption for generations can still be damaged quickly if land, health, and autonomy are threatened. When a language like Pirahã weakens, the loss would not be only words. It would be the loss of one of the most unusual ways human beings organize reality. That is why the Pirahã belong at number one among the living echoes of prehistoric worlds still alive today. They remind us that the modern mind is not the only possible human mind. A people can live without centering existence on distant history, exact numbers, written records, and endless accumulation, and still be fully human and fully present. Through them, we glimpse a truth civilization rarely admits. Progress did not simply add to humanity. It also narrowed what humanity believes is normal. The Piraha are not behind the modern world. They stand beside it, proving that another way of being human still exists.